top 3 things D2C brands can do at the moment to really improve the performance of paid creative. So things that can have quite instant impact if implemented properly. Breaking down exactly what your customers want and thinking about it in a much more simple way. And we'll put this on screen so people can see exactly what we're talking about.
We use our frameworks to make sure we go and find out, what the problem is, and it's not just chucking volume at something and seeing what sticks. That's not going to work anymore. That is the first place that we're going to look at the behavior of the consumer. Interviewing your customers is the biggest thing that I think brand owners miss. I am physically doing that right now. For Vanquish Fitness, over the last 2 days, I've called 50 of their customers to find out why someone's not purchased in the last 12 months.
And one brand that I really wanted to focus on was Swole Panda. They give us a lot of freedom, and I think brands that do that with us see better results naturally because they're a bit braver. They allow us to, step out of the norm.
Their previous agency had spent a significant amount of money at a major loss.
Eye-watering.
Yeah, an eye-watering amount of money at a major loss. The results have been night and day to what they were seeing before. So the question we get asked all the time is, why do we need increased formats? In that intended audience, you've only got one static and that's all they're seeing, or one format. We're not cultivating that journey anymore, are we? Whereas we're going to go, first of all, you're going to be hit with a great UGC video on why the product's great. We're then going to give you a bit about the founder, why it matters. We're then going to give you a bit about the actual product and why it's better than everybody else. Now you're problem and solution aware. We might give you a discount at that point to follow through. Variation within each intended audience still matters the most.
Yeah, it's a necessity. Just a question for you really, especially ahead of Q4. It's the perfect time to start implementing this into your workflow.
The first thing we'll ever do, and the biggest thing for driving net new customers, is concentrating, first of all, when they onboard on us, on those. If you're not selling something, you've either got creative, a landing page, or a product. So it's going to be one of those 3.
We've been speaking a lot recently about different topics we can talk about on the pod. Obviously, creative is still such an on-topic thing for agencies, brands, and it's definitely been the area that's developed and changed so much over the past 12 months, especially even the past 30 days. There's been 3 sort of key things I think we've been discussing over the past, again, probably a couple of weeks in terms of, the top 3 things D2C brands can do at the moment to really improve the performance of paid creative. So I think it'd be good to go through those 3 things today. We've been working on so many new processes, really innovating how we're approaching each part of this. And again, there's probably like 20 other things that we could talk about today, but I think there's these 3 that have come up quite a lot recently, especially from like a team perspective as well, in terms of sort of what they're spending time on and what we're also seeing, bring us better performance, not necessarily quickly, but the things that can have quite instant impact if implemented properly. I think just diving straight in, I think the first one is just developing a better process around customer research. We speak often about the actual steps that brands need to take and we take with our brands to actually get to concept. And I think if there's anything that we probably put more time into this year, it's been that process, hasn't it? And I think there's sort of 2 key things that this enables us to understand better, which is, 1 is clearer purchase motivators, and 2, just a clearer view of the customer journey. Producing more content is often the thing that brands think they should do, and that's if they're seeing declining ad accounts, they're seeing poor performance commercially, they just think they need to create more content. But that's not always the case, is it? And I think, again, you are in accounts a lot more than me, but yeah, I think that's something that's almost like a misconception, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely since Andromeda came in, I mean, we've seen it across the board. Brands that are coming to us now, the biggest thing is they think that chucking volume still the problem is going to be the solution. I think we always go back to what is that problem first, and obviously that's where we use our frameworks to make sure we go and find out what the problem is, and it's not just chucking volume at something and seeing what sticks. That's not going to work anymore. Like you said, we've been building out these processes as a team, and the biggest thing for us is to take more time between kind of initial concept or initial research and then to concept to design, and it's not just like we said, and a lot of agencies in 2025 it was just volume play, iterate, see what works. Now the biggest step is we need to go and find out those key areas and research them, so that then obviously, which we'll talk about in a second, so that we can actually make sure that we're hitting those pain points, personas, whatever it might be in creative.
I think volume and diversity were just 2 big buzzwords last year, and I feel like everyone just said them, and then they didn't really know how to implement it. And we obviously do a lot of creative audits, and again, we'll get into that later, but we're still seeing such a lack of quality content and diverse content. But before we do go into that, I thought it would be really useful to go through a couple of models that we've put together across the business, again, over the past this year, really, that have evolved. I think firstly, breaking down exactly what your customers want and thinking about it in a much more simple way. And we'll put this on screen so people can see exactly what we're talking about. So sort of the 5 pillars in this model is behavior. So using tools such as GA, Hotjar, Store Hero to understand exactly what customers are doing. Stated motivation, which is all around post-purchase. Again, brands don't do enough of that. There's so much data that could be captured from after the purchase, and abandonment as well is something like Meg and her team are spending so much more time on. We've got unprompted signals, that's from reviews, social channels, I guess places customers can actively and freely speak about the brand, the products, other problems. We've got advocacy and sentiment, which is, again, we use loyalty and mention me for that. And then we've got qualitative depth, which is just customer interviews.
What's interesting is if we go through each one of those, we can kind of see why it works. So, the first thing we'll do is, you can call it Hotjar, Microsoft Clarity will always, and GA4, that is the first place that we're going to look at the behavior of the consumer. We're talking touch points, we're talking what their first touch point is, bounce rates on pages, on landing pages especially, data directly from when people travel from Meta to a landing page, what's the bounce rate, PPC to a landing page, what's the bounce rate. We're looking at all of that data first.
I think something that's been really interesting for me to watch this year is how much our paid social team are actually using GA4 in a lot of different processes and workflows, and I think that just comes back to that customer journey and touch point. But I just think it's something people don't use enough.
I think it got to it was uncool. It was not sexy to use GA4 anymore. And it was like, I don't know, maybe like 2020 to 2023, 4. It was like
no one wanted to.
GA4.
We did. To be fair,
I did. We used to feel like that as well.
From a reporting tool, it definitely isn't in some aspects, but I think it was almost like an archaic.
Yeah, I know. It was like
thing.
What you're doing. That first, I guess, section is that, and that's going to come from 2 key areas I see. You could go Hotjar and Microsoft Clarity are the same thing, right? They both do the same thing, and then obviously you've got GA, which is doing something slightly different. The next one obviously is the motivation. So the motivation to purchase and what has driven that intent. Now, that is going to come from mostly looking at, I guess, why people are abandoning, how people are coming through the post-purchase flows, and then what data signals we're getting through those, what's actually making them convert. So that's a big kind of thing for us, and a lot of that comes into the problem solution, pain point, we've got the solution, those kind of angles, right? The next one obviously is the unprompted signals. So these are I guess customer reviews mainly that we'll scrape Reddit, we'll scrape Pinterest, we'll scrape reviews.io, Trustpilot, and our aim is to get info that consumers haven't just given us naturally. It's off their own back. They've gone onto Reddit, they've gone onto Trustpilot to give feedback that we can then use. And you can start to see how these work together as well, because we probably will get some motivation points from reviews as well, right? Yeah. It's not just one fits all. And then obviously the advocacy, and Luke Valente spoke about this really well, mentioned me when we did a podcast with him a few weeks back, where they were trying to understand why consumers bought them over other brands that maybe had a bigger market share or a bigger player in their space. And the info they found that was really interesting. The info they thought was why consumers bought them, which was organic and that side, actually wasn't. No one was ever mentioning that. It was all about the smell and how it made them feel, and it was less about this is a product that
it's very easy to assume, isn't it, what you think based off maybe what was happening 3 years ago, but that can change, can't it, massively?
Yeah, exactly. And then the last thing is the customer interviews, and I think this comes in 2. I could speak about this all day. I've been speaking about this for the last 4 years. Like, interviewing your customers, probably 5 years, is the biggest thing that I think brand owners miss. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here. So I think you can get customer interviews in a couple of ways. One is literally you picking up the phone, dialing, and having a bank of questions that you're asking, and popping that data into a spreadsheet. I am physically doing that right now for Vanquish. For Vanquish Fitness, over the last 2 days, I've called 50 of their customers, right? 50 customers for Vanquish to find out why someone's not purchased in the last 12 months. Vanquish has gone through massive change over this last period, in production, in clothing, in community. And I have sat down and I've taken a random sample of people that haven't bought in the last 12 months, called them, and we've found out why. So I won't kind of reveal the results now, because we've not actually revealed these with Vanquish, but it's been so interesting to find out. And then obviously the other side is every client that onboards with us on CRM, or even if they don't and they're happy for us to do it, we will do a customer questionnaire via CRM. So we'll send it out to the list of engaged users, and we're going to find out certain questions on motivators, on sizes, on why they haven't purchased in a while, on what made them purchase first, on how old they are, their lifestyle, what are the brands they like. We're getting all of that information. So not only can we get that from Reddit, from Trustpilot, we can also then get that from a questionnaire too, right? And then obviously the final thing is when we're at Maison, for that first year period, I was calling every single new customer, no matter how many days, or we had 100 orders, and you can imagine not everyone answered me and not everyone was delighted to speak to me, but every time I would call them and find out why they purchased, what was that final thing that got them, what was the first thing they got them when they first hear about us, what was the ad or the the feeling that got them to purchase from us over other people. And then I'd use that then in meta ads, in PPC, in Klaviyo, to then attract that next wave of customers.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's putting more effort into collecting more primary data, which we all, like, brands have that. And I think when we're talking about, diverse formats, new concepts, different angles, that is where those ideas come from. Just all going onto our team, we're able to produce such an array of like innovative formats and angles because we're doing this, basically, isn't it? A lot of it comes from obviously, having amazingly creative people in the team, but it's also driven by collecting data like that.
100%. I think just to add to that, I think we see a lot of brands go, this other brand's doing this, or this creative angles work for this other brand, and that's fine, and you need to use some inspiration, but really you want those net new ideas that have come from your research, not, oh, I've seen this brand running this ad for a year, it must be great. We don't know why they're using that ad, and this is what I think people forget. This big brand might have run this ad for a year. Well, this style must work for my brand, and actually they might just be using that to drive traffic, or they might be using that to a specific landing page to do a specific thing. And I think actually if you just take one step back and go, what do the customers that I want or have bought from me need, what motivates them to purchase, we're then going to build all our concepts from that point. And I think it's a lot more solid base to start from, and continue iterating from.
I bet you enjoyed ringing all them customers now, didn't you? You're itching to do it.
I know. Well, and for me with Vanquish as well, because I've not done it in a year. Well, no, I've not done it in 6 years now. Really. And then when I've done it for Vanquish, it's been eye-opening, really has. And I think I've actually had more ideas just from those 50 calls, and I think 25 or 24 actually picked up and called me back. But out of those 25 people that I've got the data from, I know, because it was such a subsect. It was women, men, old, young. It was a random subsect that I tripped through Claude. It's been super interesting.
And I think that takes us nicely into, I guess, what we actually do after the research process, which is we take brands through a creative direction process and deck. Again, this has been something we've been developing much more this year, but I think it'd be good to talk through the different steps. But obviously we start with some foundational stuff, so looking at the brand story, looking at the brand vision. We then look at their core values and USPs. That takes us then into brand identity, so that's everything from fonts, color codes, different typography bits, and then we go right into competitors and inspiration. I think the inspiration side is interesting because that's something we go quite deep into, and that could be indirect brands as well that don't have anything to do with the client that we're working with, and then into sort of the main, I guess where the actual value is, which is looking at the historical data. We leverage motion a lot for this. So we look at intended audiences, and I think messaging hooks and messaging angles is the other two reports that we use. That drives so much insight around opportunities and threats across budget allocation, resource allocation, where are we actually focusing our time and creative on. But how can brands use those type of reports to, I guess, shape their ongoing creative strategy, because we use those reports in our weekly workflow. So that's something that our team are regularly looking at, making sure that everything is, I guess, on track to meet certain either hooks, formats, personas. But what are the main reports we're using at the moment?
Yeah, so I think the two main ones that we are using on, like you said, on the weekly basis within Motion, I guess, other than looking at, you know, CPA and ROAS and what kind of, you know, is going on per creative, the two biggest reports are going to be intended audiences. So out of your creative that Meta is reading, who is it serving it to? I think that's really simple. I think people get confused about what intended audience is on Meta. So it's your creative, how is Andromeda read it, and then who is it serving it to? So that's the first one, and we'll go into that in a second. And then the second one is our net new concepts report. So is a report on how many concepts you've actually got in your account, right? And obviously we've got, you know, UGC, flat lays, we've got, you know, statics, we've got, you know, split screen, you've got, I mean, we could go on, right? And claymation, you know, so many animations, so many different formats. And obviously what we're trying to do is expand that range of formats as much as we can. But if we start with intended audiences, so obviously this goes all the way back to the research phase. And in the research phase, we would have picked out our key personas of people. And this can be as many or as little as you like. We tend to land between 5 and 8 is where we'll see from a persona basis. And these are key personas that we will then create creative behind for Meta to then go and find. So once we've had our initial concepting, we've got our personas down, and then we've had that initial period in the account where our creative is live, we will then review Motion to understand the creative we've produced. Is it hitting those key personas or those intended audiences that we wanted it to with the creative? We will then look at ROAS and CPA per creative in that intended audiences, and that will give us a good idea then of what we need to iterate on and what next month is gonna look like from a net new concept perspective and an iteration perspective. What that means then is for most brands, let's say we took 5 intended audiences and 5 personas. From that point, we will then see how many of those personas have hit our intended audiences, and let's say it's 3 out of 5. We've obviously then got to try and hit those other 2 personas with the Meta, and that's what we'll try and do. We will then look at ROAS per intended audience. So let's say, for example, we'll take hair syrup. Let's say they've got loads of intended audiences, but if we take 2, one being menopause, the other being a health conscious woman, right? You know, might be the 2. What we might see is that the menopause intended audience has actually got a ROAS of 8, 9, 10, but actually the spend has been 50% of that of the other audience. So now our job is, how can we force Meta to spend more against that audience? We know it's a primed audience, we know it's selling well, we've looked at the top level metrics, we know that product that's intended for that audience, which is the menopause bundle, is selling well. We're then obviously going to go away, iterate on creative, make sure it's as diverse as we can, and then again, what we're going to do the next month, we're going to review it. Right, where has spend got to? Has the creative we've produced, you know, landed into that intended audience? If it hasn't, why has Meta not been able to read that creative properly to hit that intended audience? And the goal is inevitably to get, there's a column called none in Motion, and that's where Motion doesn't think that Meta can read who this is intended for. And our aim, and most accounts that we audit, the none will be up here. It'll be none will be most of their creative. Our job is to get that as low as we can, number wise of creatives, and funnel those into an intended audience. I think that gives everybody a real clear insight into how it works. Yeah,
we probably didn't feel we had at the start of this year, because their Motion reports have improved so much, haven't they? And then going back to the creative direction process we go through, that is one of the key pillars of that, or parts of it, is basically plugging all the historical data into Motion, and then it gives us the clarity on, again, where we need to spend our time initially, where are the opportunities. I think the next thing that I wanted to go through, and it's something we've seen regularly for a couple of years really, but more prevalent over the past sort of 12 months, is brands not having enough diversity, and just, I guess, not increasing the amount of formats that they're running through Meta. Again, we said this at the start, but like diversification and volume were just such big buzzwords of last year, but I still think brands are not quite understanding how to get the level of diversification in the account properly underpinned by quality. And like you especially have audited like hundreds of accounts this year. It's still, especially for fashion, it's still the main bottleneck in there. And looking through our sort of creative workflow this year, the amount of different formats that we're actually running with brands is so high, even compared to, 6 months prior. And one brand that I really wanted to focus on was Swole Panda. I think they give us a lot of freedom, and I think brands that do that with us see better results naturally because they're a bit braver. They allow us to, I guess, step out of the norm a little bit more, which I think cuts through the feed better. But I think for those guys, we're running so many different formats, whether that's animation across brand story, founder content, product content. We're doing a lot around statics, which is covering, again, founder content, offer, high production product flat lays. We've got even memes working really well for us at the moment. Lifestyle, some of the Venn diagram sort of whiteboard stuff Jonah's been doing as well is performing really well. So there's a lot of different things in there. And then obviously we have a lot of UGC, sort of lower funnel stuff as well. You've obviously been very involved with the direction of that and ensuring that everything we're doing within Meta has commercial impact. And again, we can sort of visualize the diversification of Swole Panda on the video so people can see exactly what we're talking about. But I think take us through how you've approached that account, because they've flown this year, because again, they've allowed us to actually work properly for one, and they work with us, which is always makes things easier. They've been braver with concepts. They've not been, they've been happy to lean into different AI tools, or they've been happy to try different things that they might not have thought maybe fit exactly with guidelines. But again, we can see results are just in a different place compared to someone who isn't doing that.
What makes Swole Panda quite unique, I guess, was two things before they came to us. One was that their previous agency had spent a significant amount of money at a major loss.
Eye-watering.
An eye-watering amount of money at a major loss, which inevitably, although that's horrible for Swole Panda, helped us because we had this net pool of customers that had, purchased from us. Secondly, if we look at the whole of that last period, they had one or two ads that were basically pushing the whole account, right? Yeah. Actually, weirdly, I think off the top of my head, they were both founder-led ads. So James and Oliver, it was very humorous.
They're good, to be fair, on camera. Yeah.
It was very humorous founder-led ads, but that was it, and that was running the account. And if you looked at all the other statics and videos that have been thrown in, nothing was working. And I think what people forget is when you've only got two ads that are working, there's only so much reach you can get from those two pieces of creative. The first thing we did do, obviously, is we followed our process that we always follow to get our personas, to get who we're going after, to understand what the customer is, to understand the persona per product as well. I think that's super important because
just on that, when we went down to see them at the start of the year, they obviously have socks as their main product area, but like belts have been flying for us. So I think, again, it's interesting around product as well when we actually do the persona work, what that can do to just, I guess, sales of different SKUs as well.
They've got 4 key products, really. So they've got socks, underwear, belts, and swim shorts. So those are the 4 key ones. Now, what we have to understand is that 4 separate customers? Is that 4 customers that are going to be very similar? They're different price points, obviously. Is a existing sock customer going to purchase into a swim trunk? Those are all the questions that when we're in that boardroom, when we were kind of, digging into this brand, that's what we're asking each other. Who are those consumers going to be? Now, I imagine there's going to be a fair amount of crossover, but I think we can get a very different swimwear customer, a cool recycled plastic, swimwear customer in the belts and the shorts over a organic sock. I think it's probably different. Now, the other thing that we had to contend with and battle with, which I think a lot of brands also have, is the gifting purchase. So majority of Swole Panda's customers during Q4 are going to be a gift for a partner, for a son, for a daughter, whatever it might be, an uncle. So we had to contend with how do we attract a different customer? How do we attract a gifting customer and then someone who's purchasing a product for themselves? Because that's 2 totally different angles, 2 totally different journeys, to purchase, right? So those are the places we started. And then off the back of that, it was, okay, how can we then produce creative that's more diverse, that hits all those key angles? And what you've seen, like you just said, is we're now able to reach a much wider audience pool. We're able to serve better products to that pool. And the results have been night and day to what they were seeing before. We've now got a plan for profitable growth for these guys. So the question we get asked all the time is, why do we need increased formats across, UGC, flat lay, statics, all of those kind of things? And I think the easiest way to explain it is we've got our intended audiences, and we always go back to this, to reach further people within each intended audience, you need a wider variety of creative to further reach those people. And that's effectively why we've got to have that, because imagine this: if you've got just static within one intended audience, that's only going to go after people that are receptive to statics in that intended audience, whereas you then branch out to everything. And then this is before we even think about the actual funnel that still matters in terms of at what point of the journey in that intended audience do they then see a piece of creative that then converts them. Because for most brands, I mean, we were talking about beauty brands in the boardroom earlier, and they've got 8 touch points before they've even converted. So imagine you've got one intended audience, and let's say a beauty enthusiast for this beauty brand. So a beauty enthusiast intended audience. First of all, it still matters how they come through that funnel. I know we don't really call it that anymore,
journey,
but how they come through that journey to purchase. And if you've in that intended audience, you've only got one static and that's all they're seeing, or one format, what we're not cultivating that journey anymore, are we? Whereas we're going to go, okay, you're going to be, first of all, you're going to be hit with a great UGC video on why the product's great. We're then going to give you a bit about the founder, why it matters. We're then going to give you a bit about the actual product and why it's better than everybody else. We're then going to give you, now you're problem and solution aware. We might give you a discount at that point to follow through. So again, I think that's probably the easiest way to explain why then creative variation within each intended audience still matters the most.
Yeah, it's a necessity. I think the third and sort of final thing that we wanted to speak about today was product reports. This has been something you've sort of banged on about for the past, probably 4 years. Every brand has access to this data, but no one seems to use it properly. And again, this is something that we've integrated into our weekly creative workflow, is looking at product reports across stock and margin especially, and really ensuring that, again, we're focusing on the right things, and the right things in terms of, again, stock levels, but also, again, what's actually driving profit. One recent use case is a fashion brand we started working with who has over 250 SKUs. 8 of them were driving 80% of gross profit, yet spend was pretty minimal towards those 8 SKUs. Obviously, we learned that in onboarding, allowed us to then, spend in the right areas and instantly see the impact on the bottom line. I think just a question for you, really, especially ahead of Q4, it's the perfect time to start implementing this into your workflow, creative and just sort of business wide as well. What is your advice around product reports? How can brands use them, find them, and implement them again into that workflow?
From a basic level, I think you can obviously find your product reports on Shopify most of the time, but also then within Store Hero is where we'll pull most of them, and we'll combine that data into reports that make sense for us from 2 levels. Stock position, you're going to find that best on Shopify or whatever you use for your stock solution. Bigger brands use different tools, but for a lot of brands, they're still using the Shopify inventory. And then obviously from the other side, the gross profit side, that data is held within Shopify, but we just pull that from Store Hero because it's easier. And there's 2 things here. First of all, if your agency produces creative against low stock products, how frustrating is that? I've been there myself. It is the most frustrating
thing
ever.
Not with us, by the way.
Not with you.
Yeah.
So the most frustrating thing ever. So that's the first thing is, can we, are we producing creative around stuff that's in stock? And the guys will, every week, they are finding and going into Shopify, looking at stock positions. A lot of brands send us weeks cover and, what they're trying to sell this week and, how long have we got until this certain product is going to be out of stock. So even down to the designers are actually involved in that, because what's the point in them spending time designing something, producing a piece of creative if it's going to be out of stock? There's always nuances to that. There might be something we're doing for a certain product, but for the majority of the time, that's what we're doing. We're then, as part of that onboarding process, we're looking at spend distribution against product gross profit. So as you said, majority of clothing brands, it's slightly different in beauty. In beauty, you tend to see one hero product, and then the rest of them supplement it behind that. In fashion, it tends to be 5 to 10 key core products that make most gross profit in the business and most of your sales, and then the rest of them there are then to supplement. What you'll tend to see is PPC on one side will just spend everything against those products, and also our meta, our job is to make sure that we're spending and we're building creative around those products to force more spend into those ones that are producing the most gross profit. Inevitably, what you'll tend to see is if you spread yourself too thin from a product perspective, obviously gross profit, net profit will then reduce because it takes, more of a CPA to sell that product that isn't as in demand. Now, obviously, the battle we have all the time, and what we then make sure we go through an onboarding is brand A, brand B, brand C. You need to keep those items in stock all year round, because they are going to be your biggest drivers. We're going to see a massive detriment in new customers, especially on Meta, if one of those, two of those, three of those start to go out of stock at all points. And I know we have this battle a lot with brands, is like, keep those winners in stock, and it will drive the business forward. I was actually listening to a podcast on the way here, and Sanucci, the brand Sanucci, so they launched women's clothing a few years ago. They got major investment. They have one core product in their women's brand, which is the double tracksuit, which and honestly, when I was listening to this podcast, I was like, every brand is feeling the same thing.
Yeah.
Drives their every other sale, drives all of their range. It's £110, and it drives everything else. And their job is to try and keep that in stock at all points, because then people will come back and purchase the other stuff. So a lot of founders go, but I'm producing all of this extra stuff. I'm producing it. Well, how do I sell it? Well, obviously, that's a different conversation. We need to work out, how are we going to sell those other 30, 40 line items? But the first thing we'll ever do, and the biggest thing for driving net new customers for any fashion brand, is concentrating, first of all, when they onboard on us, on those top key products first for new customers. We could talk about the strategy for the other 30, 40 things that aren't selling, but that's the first thing that we will ever do.
What was it Amazon?
In terms of what was selling?
Yeah, top SKUs.
It was always Stone Island and Montclair. So those were
like the hero product lines.
Yeah, the hero. Yeah. So those were our hero brands. And then within that, depending on the time, there was between 2019 and 2022, it was the Maya Montclair jacket.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it was like £1,000. You couldn't sell enough of them. And then Stone Island basic tees and sweats. So everyone has that. And yet we had, I think at Mason we had 70 plus brands, maybe 80 plus brands. We knew a lot of them were fillers for other
just
things.
To be there. Was a lot of that, again, going off topic a bit, but for the physical store, having a better just store in general? Was that?
Well, you've got to, and I think for a lot of fashion brands, we'll have this conversation when they're on board, is like, what is the rest of this catalogue you've got for? Yeah. Was it that you thought this would be an incredible product and it's not landed? Is the creative, and we're getting into what we do with those other 30, 40 now, but is the creative strong enough? Is the product shot strong enough? We dive into returns and see, are we actually seeing that product's returned a lot more? And that's why you've still got lots of stock of it. You're selling it, but it gets return loads. And those kind of questions, and we'll siphon products out into two. One is your 5 to 10 key SKUs, which we're going to drive all our net new with. And the other is, how do we then sell those other 30, 40, obviously it could be thousands, but let's say those 30, 40 other SKUs that are not selling, that are not producing great net profit. What are we going to do with those? How are we going to reinvigorate those kind of, those key drivers? Because inevitably, we say this a lot, if you're not selling something, you've either got creative, a landing page, or a product. So it's going to be one of those three.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you found any of the topic areas we discussed interesting, just check out the rest of our channel. We're releasing weekly internal episodes with team members, and also we've got amazing guests already on the channel and some amazing guests coming up as well. There'll be a link around this video in the description to download our D2C creative playbook, which covers all the different topic areas that me and Ed discussed today, along with a few sort of other key things that, again, we feel are really important to, high performing performance creative.